So today I thought I'd try to simplify everything down so it cuts through all the misinformation that you can get out there, but also just making sure that you've got the key steps right, because as the boys go through life, they're going to have to cook for themselves and everyone eats. So just thought I'd keep things pretty simple. Now when I think about food, especially for athletes but also general people as well, that falls under 3 categories. So the first category is the biggest. If you think of a pyramid, it's that bottom big layer, and these are things like breakfast, it's lunch, it's dinner, maybe a couple of snacks thrown in there, it's the water that you drink. Everyone eats, and breakfast, lunch and dinner are the key things that it sounds simple, sounds stupid, it's common sense, but as your timetables get more and more busy, as you're training in the morning, you're training in the evening, it's these kind of things that somehow slide out the window. So hands up for the players in here, but also parents. If you had training, say at 10 a.m. in the morning, who would eat breakfast? You're training at 10, half. If you're training at 6 a.m., who would eat breakfast? It's like 2 guys. For those who wouldn't eat breakfast before they train, why? Get a stitch? Why do you think that happens? Unfit. Need to do more training. So some people, if they have an early training, they wake up just in time to get dressed and roll out the door. So it's that organisation of, yes, if you train an hour earlier than normal, then wake up an hour earlier. Then you've got time to get ready, you've got time to make breakfast, you've got time to let breakfast digest, so that by the time you hit training, you're good to go. And sometimes players, even at the high level, they're, we train at, I've got to be here at 7. I come down from Auckland, they stay up late. So it's that in the evening, when they stay up late, they want to sleep in as much as possible, so they skip breakfast. And they come to training and they're hungry, and it's just this cycle that if you keep it back to basics, have dinner, have a rest, do what you want to do in the evenings, go to bed early, wake up early, eat breakfast, good to go again. So it's things like that. That's the main bulk layer. If you can nail breakfast, if you can nail lunch, if you can nail dinner, drinking water and staying hydrated, that's the key part of what's going to get you through training, get you through school, but also for the parents, gets you through work, and it's things like that. The second layer is what is more of the specific things, and this is really where the media takes hold, because they find that people know about, eating breakfast, but they want to make money off having high protein or low carb or coconut oil, or all of these messages that you hear out there. Is the second layer. So it's all the more specific parts of the nutrition pyramid. So who in here is like one of their rugby goals is to put on lean muscle mass? Yeah. So it's quite common as you guys go through stages of rugby. If you're coming up from club level into ITM level, you often have to put on lean body mass. From ITM into Super Rugby is a huge increase in lean body mass. So we had a lot of new chiefs coming through this year in the interim, the newer guys who need to put on lean muscle mass. And on top of their already busy schedules, that's actually quite hard to do. So for those guys, this is when these little key tips on top of breakfast, lunch and dinner, it's things like having a high protein diet, and also having enough calories that protein's getting used for your muscles and not just burnt as energy as they're running around. So who here thinks meat's expensive? Well, good meat's expensive. Yeah. So sometimes, we can't all eat eye fillet every night, but if you're choosing good mince, good quality lean meat, then it's making a difference. Things like lentils and chickpeas, they might sound a bit foreign for some people, but if you're adding them into your meals like spaghetti bolognese and cottage pie, then they're a good way to bulk things up and add extra protein without adding extra money. And things like eggs for breakfast are key. Protein's also found in things like yogurt and milk and these dairy products. So things like that, just trying to include them in your lunches, but also in your snacks and your dinners to try and get up that protein so you hold on to your muscle and try to increase your muscle. And that's also important for the guys who are trying to lose some of that fat mass. So got any like big props are typical. They come through club level and then they try to go to Super Rugby. And props in Super Rugby are a little bit slimmer, even though they've got heaps of muscle. So these guys, when they're trying to drop those skin folds, it's still important to keep lots of protein so they're holding on to their muscles, and just rein in the carbohydrate foods and the high fat foods just a little bit to make sure that they're meeting their goals, but they're also not losing that muscle, because especially for rugby, that's what makes you strong, that makes you powerful. And if you've got that contact game, you want to make sure that you've got a bit of beef there to knock that other player. So it's just thinking of, you've got your carbs, your protein and your fat, and those are the things that you're playing around a little bit to make sure that your body composition is where you want it to be at the end of the day. The top little layer in that nutrition pyramid is the supplements. So these get talked about a lot in sport, especially the higher up you go, the more messages there are out you, and there's a lot of confusion and like potential for good things with supplements, but also potential for contamination. And as you go through rugby and get higher and higher, the contamination can be quite scary because you're more likely to get drug tested. So making sure that any supplements that you do use are from reputable sources, and this is things like protein powder. If you're using pre-workout, that's something to be really careful about. But also these things are so expensive and not necessarily crucial to your training. So they're the only little top section. They might be the 1 or 2% of your nutrition, and you can't use them to try and replicate that bottom layer. If you're not having breakfast, lunch and dinner, then the supplements aren't going to make a big difference. So things like protein powder get used a lot in rugby. They're quite mundane for a lot of players, but with them, milk powder, just your plain old milk powder from the supermarket, only costs a couple of bucks, and compared to like a big tub of protein can set you back $100. So it's a huge difference in price for not that much difference in nutritional composition. So if you want to boost up your protein, protein powders seem a bit scary or a bit too expensive, then just adding a couple of spoonfuls of milk powder to your porridge, a couple of spoonfuls into your mashed potato, things like that. You can mix it into yogurt if you want. And it's just a really cheap, easy way to boost up your protein without spending lots of dollars. So I thought I'd ask you a few questions today about the types of foods that you eat as a family, or problems that you face as a family when you're trying to eat together, but also you have an athlete who's trying to eat like the whole pantry, but probably you guys have other siblings and other people who are trying to feed as well. So who here struggles with the price of food? Yeah, be honest. Yeah, so it's just when you're on a budget, it's about where your priorities lie and making the most of the money that you do have that's allocated towards food, making the best choices. So if you had some money, you could easily go down to KFC and get a bucket, but you could use that same money. I could see a few people like, oh yeah. You could use the same money to go to the supermarket and making good choices, both for you nutritionally as a family, but also as players. Your nutritious choices are helping you to fuel your training, they're helping you to recover from training and getting ready for the next day. So it's about those choices that you make day to day. They add up over time to either you're making good choices with your nutrition, what you're eating, or bad ones. And especially as you start training more and more and your timetable gets really, really busy, if you're not making good choices, sometimes things can slide out pretty easily and your skin folds blow out and you're tired and things go a bit of a downward circle. So does anyone have any questions specifically around nutrition and what's best, or if they're struggling at home, can try and discuss them, talk through things like this? Yep. Yeah, so when you're training, it depends on what time the training is. So if training's just after like lunch or dinner or breakfast, then those meals will provide the nutrition you need for training. But then after you finish training, you need something to help recovery. So a mixture of carbohydrate and protein. So this might be something as simple as chocolate milk, or it might be having like an egg sandwich, or just something that's got some sort of carbohydrate food and some sort of protein food afterwards. If you have training maybe mid-afternoon and then by the time you get home it's dinner time, then dinner's a perfect recovery food. You don't need something on top of that if you're about to have a meal. If you're kind of like a standard day, we'd normally say about breakfast, lunch and dinner and maybe 2 to 3 snacks. And it's just if you're trying to put on muscle, then it's making the most of those meals and those snacks to make sure they're really good kind of high protein, high energy choices. So something like an apple does, it's got some nutrients in there, but something with a bit more substance might help you a bit more. So, any more questions?
I've got a question. When I was young, I got told that I had to, my diet, eat a lot of protein.
Yeah.
And that was really important in terms of trying to be an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, if that's yes, more important than carbohydrates and fats as you said before, and then what's the easiest source to have protein? Like, is it boiled eggs or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So protein, actually now I've got markers, so I'll write it up on the board. I'll get you guys to call out some types of protein and what you guys would have as snacks or meals, and then we'll work through it. So we'll talk about eggs, protein, steak, that comes under meat, fish. Mentioned some earlier. Pardon?
Milk.
Yep. Mhm. What about vegetarians?
Chickpeas.
Yep. Who here eats chickpeas? So things like chickpeas, lentils is another one. They just come in a can, about like $1.30. So such a cheap way to bulk out your mince, or you just eat them like as a salad, or just Google up recipes. There's heaps of them out there. So if you're struggling with budgeting for these with guys who are eating heaps, things like these are equally good to try and get some protein in there. I've got another one. Do you guys eat a lot of cheese? Yeah. So cheese comes under dairy, like milk, but it's quite high fat. So you guys are trying to watch your skin folds. Having heaps of cheese can contribute, but having a wee bit here and there isn't too bad. And some cheeses are better than others. So Edam is a slightly lower fat compared to regular Tasty or Colby. Cottage cheese, pretty plain, but it's one of the most lower fat cheeses, things like that. There's another dairy that we haven't got up on here. Yogurt, yeah. Do you have one?
When's the best time of the day to have like fatty foods? Like cheese?
There's not really a specific time of day that it's like your metabolism does fluctuate a little bit during the day, but not to the extent that there's like optimum times for things like that. So your fatty foods like cheese, other fatty foods like nuts and seeds, these are pretty good as a snack because they're protein as well as fat. But especially for the guys, if you're struggling to hold your weight during training or you want to bulk up your weight, things like that are good to have as snacks or just incorporate in your meals. So it's not like, dinner's a real good time for fatty food, but it's just spreading it out during the day. Yep.
Is it good to have sauces with your meals?
What kind of sauces?
Beans, Tomato sauce.
Yeah, so it's things like tomato sauce are a little bit less less calories in them. So if you're trying to bulk up your weight, then mayonnaise falls into the high fat foods. But if you're only having a little bit, then it's a balance, you know. But if you're having heaps of mayonnaise, then it probably contributes. So it's a balance with everything, and with all of these as well. So these are all proteins. When we talk about proteins as part of our meal, we're talking about the size of our hand. A few big rugby players, especially if you're trying to put on weight and you're struggling to keep your weight during training, then increasing this a little bit can help as well. But especially for the families, when you're trying to set a good example to others and, you know, learn what's an appropriate amount for you to eat, protein are about the size of your hand. And the same for carbohydrate, we talk about a fist. So my hands are a lot smaller than some of you guys. So my little carbohydrate portion takes up just about a quarter of my plate. And then lots of veggies for, you know, nutrients and things. Veggies can go off very quickly, so buying frozen or canned if you want to. But frozen veggies are a really good way to save on money. They're not going to go off if they're sitting in your freezer, and, you know, lots of nutrients in them, fill you up. Any other questions? Yeah.
Does it matter like how you cook your eggs?
As long as they're cooked.
Can you
So-
just fry it with oil?
Yeah, so when you fry eggs, that added oil, if there's heaps and heaps of oil, it can get quite like greasy and fatty. So about a little bit of oil so they don't stick is fine. For some reason, the Chiefs guys all love to poach their eggs. I don't know why, but that's their favourite. But it doesn't matter if they're boiled or poached. You can whack eggs in the microwave and cooks them in, you know, a minute. It's easy as. So it's just simple steps to try and make sure that you're eating food. We haven't talked about junk food or takeaways yet. Also alcohol. As you get more into rugby, you know, rugby's got quite a big kind of history with alcohol and drinking after games. But it does impact on your recovery. So it's just this choice that you have to make and setting good examples. Especially as you get higher up in rugby, you start becoming role models for others if you aren't already. So it's about setting good examples for others, but also looking after yourself and your own rugby. Keeping healthy and making sure that your nutrition's as best as it can be, that your training's as best as it can be, so that your game's the best that it can be. Any other questions? Yep.
If you didn't feel like eating after training, like you just didn't feel like it,
Yeah.
could you replace that with anything else, like a fruit shake or anything?
Yeah. So, especially after like conditioning, but yeah, after any training, quite often people don't like eating. So they say you've got a 30-minute window. That's really good to optimize it in there, but as long as you have something afterwards. If you don't feel like sitting down to a meal, then a smoothie can be good. So it's just about what you're putting in there as well. What would you normally put in a shake? So when you've got something, you can include milk, include yogurt, you can include, so as your proteins. If you want, you can add extra milk powder as like a cheap protein powder to boost up that protein. And then just things like fruit. Frozen berries are really good, but bananas, it's whatever you've got on hand. Pretty easy to whip up.
If they are going to have a cheat meal, is it best to have it after the games?
Yep. Yep. What do you guys?
Some of the guys in their plan have got one cheat meal a week,
Yeah.
so they try to pick when they're going to
Yeah.
cheat.
If your cheat meal, I mean, often they're high-fat takeaways, but if you can include some sort of protein, I mean, that chicken might be deep fried, but it's still chicken, and some sort of veggies, slice of lettuce. Yeah. But Also, if you guys are having takeaways, the better quality, the better. So Burger Fuel's better than the McDonald's cheeseburger. It's just making those choices. Any other questions?
If I like miss lunch,
Yeah.
and then I have training after school,
Mhm.
do training, and then for dinner I eat like twice more than usual. Is that good?
It's best to eat lunch or eat something. If you do end up skipping a meal, then you should eat like more than usual, but it doesn't have to be twice. So it's best to keep to your normal routines. It's hard to say whether, how much you should eat at one time because you're going to be so full and starving. But things like that, if you skip a meal, then it is a bit of a lost opportunity because you've lost the fuel for your training. So, you're still having food to recover afterwards, but you've lost that initial bit. Things like that, if you're just keeping like a muesli bar or like pieces of fruit or like anything that's not going to rot away in the bottom of your bag, but if you have some snacks, they're like emergency snacks on you, then it can save that a little bit.